They say you really come to know yourself, not in the comfort of routine, but in those forgotten moments between new places and unfamiliar nights. That, at least in part, is why I've always been a traveler. Perhaps less for adventure and more for discovery, if I'm being honest. In all my years journeying from city to city, making friends out of strangers and stories out of scenery, I've seen my share of wild places, moss-draped forests, silent desert towns, lakes so clear you could see tomorrow in them if you tried. But nothing quite sticks in my memory the way that one misty weekend in the Adirondacks does. If you've ever driven through upstate New York in late October, you'll know the feeling, golden leaves blanketing ancient mountains, the world seemingly paused in a fairy tale. It was, truly, the kind of place you imagine retiring to. A place for solitude. Though I lived most of my life in Oregon, that October I was working in hotel management and got sent east for a training conference and property audit. Now, managing hotels has its perks, discounted getaways, last-minute upgrades, generous expense accounts, but this time, after a tough quarter, I didn't want a suite, or a sprawling lobby. I wanted silence, and the Adirondacks sprawled invitingly on a map. So, I hopped on Airbnb and found exactly what I needed, a cedar-shingled home tucked between towering oaks and sugar maples, its backyard bordering a no-name creek and nothing else. The listing by a local named Jules showed floor-to-ceiling windows, a wide deck, and someone's hammock slung between trees, their dog blurred in the grass. It felt, immediately, like a place built for hiding out. Jules herself, the host, stayed anonymous in the listing for privacy. Her messages were warm but succinct. All I needed to know was that the key was in a lockbox, and her fiancé used to live there but had moved out. "It's all yours for the weekend," her message ended, with a smiley. I arrived late that Friday, the woods already swallowed by darkness. There was a hush in the air that city people never hear, pure, total quiet, save for the distant sigh of wind and perhaps a coyote's yip. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, wandered out to the back deck, and watched the shadows stretch beneath the trees. Every worry I'd brought with me slowly dissolved, replaced by the crisp tingle of autumn night air and, for the first time in months, the slow beating rhythm of my own heartbeat. My only real work was a few emails in the afternoons and evenings, which meant the mornings were mine alone. I woke just after sunrise on Saturday, the forest glowing in amber light like some old painter's memory. Jogging along the narrow gravel drive, I told myself I'd come here to find peace, and yet, there it was, that uncanny feeling, as if the woods themselves were watching. There's a particular kind of hush in the Adirondacks, and that morning, it seemed the forest held its breath. Nothing sinister, at first. Just the sense of being observed. Maybe that's why, instead of pushing myself, I cut the jog short, feeling almost embarrassed by my nerves. I made a pot of coffee, settled in on the deck, and tried to laugh it off. But, as twilight fell, the feeling lingered. My colleagues had planned to carpool out and join me, but their plans fell through. By 10, the house was silent again, and I was alone with the bones of the place. I tried to press through the unease, telling myself there's always some adjustment period in a new home, old plumbing, creaky floors, and all that. But every so often, a low groan or subtle scuffle would pull me out of my thoughts, my breathing tightening. I checked the locks, front, back, all windows, 3 times before heading to bed. Still, I tossed and turned. Sometime just after midnight, desperate for sleep, I turned on music. But instead of drowning out the tension, it only seemed to give shape to the unseen movements in the house's edges. Finally, an hour later and wide awake, I gave up. Craving nicotine and nerves, I reached for my coat and stepped out. At the bottom of those oak stairs, the kitchen and dining room opened up, moonlight painting silver patterns on honeywood floors. I reached for the sliding glass door leading to the deck, but just as I was about to step outside, every inch of my body froze. Shrouded in semi-dark, I saw him. Or rather, a silhouette, warped and pitted, standing perfectly still just beyond the kitchen island. 6 feet tall, long shadowy hair and a ragged beard. He turned slowly, the moonlight just enough to see eyes locked on mine, eyes that seemed both furious and heartbroken. In that instant, my body screamed run. My mind, though, was transfixed. For what felt like both a moment and a lifetime, I was rooted there, my hand still hovering above the sliding door handle. The stranger and I locked eyes, not a word exchanged, just the humming, pulsing fear that pressed into every inch of my skin. Later, I'd tell myself maybe we just startled each other, but in the thick soup of that moment, every childhood ghost story bubbled up at once. If this had been a movie, this was the part where someone made a dumb choice and the audience screamed at the screen. Yet, all I did was inch backward, never turning away, adrenaline coursing like ice water. He stood partially hunched, as if ready to spring. I whispered, my words trembling, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" He made no sound but his lips moved, chewing over some private words. I felt the cyclone from my stomach rise to my throat. Even with the moon at his back it was clear he was real, not an apparition, not a bad dream. I couldn't process who he resembled, but somehow his presence felt out of time, both brand new and deeply familiar. 10, maybe 15 seconds, long enough for my knees to lock and my palms to sweat. That was all it was. Then, in a flash fueled by pure panic, I backed up the stairs, skipped over 2 steps at a time, and slammed the bedroom door behind me. The lock, thankfully a chunky old deadbolt, clicked shut. I doubled over, catching my breath as my brain raced with every worst-case scenario. Was this a burglar? An obsessed ex? Some small-town drifter or lost hiker? Should I bolt from the window? Run into the woods? I didn't have my keys, my wallet, just my phone, and the houses were miles apart out here. I couldn't just run blind into the night. I pressed my body against the door, listening for movement below. A metallic bang rang out, a pounding fist striking against wood. Then, nothing but muffled utterances, barely words. "Miranda, Miranda, it's me, it's Cal. I love you. Don't do this to me." My name wasn't Miranda. My heart stuttered at some stranger's desperate grief. He began murmuring over and over, as if convincing himself of a life that had slipped away. It was a plea, not a threat, but it was heartbreak laced with instability. The next blow was harder, the hollow thump of knuckles gnawing wood. Still in a state of shock, I realized I had no idea what this man was capable of, or what he was carrying. I dialed 911 with shaking hands, the dispatcher's voice cutting through the fog. "Please, someone's broken into my rental, there's a man, he keeps calling for Miranda. Please hurry." She stayed on the line, her calm steadying me just enough to relay the address Jules had left. She urged me to stay put and keep quiet, promising help was minutes away. But outside my door, chaos rose. The banging grew insistent, wood splintering, and then a fist punching straight through the panel, fingers flexing. "Miranda! Let me in. Please." My mind reeled, picturing what might happen if the door finally gave. Then, sirens. Unmistakable, slicing through the forest calm. Blue and red lights splattered through window blinds, casting broken shadows. I heard men shout. One gave a warning, another's voice, serious, level, firm. There was a scuffle, a sharp crash, a body thrown, a shout in pain. In that confusion, I wrenched my bedroom window open, lowering myself the way my brother and I used to sneak out as kids, down a sloping shed roof to soft earth below. A pair of boots, police issue, crunched close. An officer reached up, steadied me, and whispered reassurance. "You're safe." The ordeal ended quickly. They led the intruder, Cal, his whole body quivering in the strobing light, out in cuffs, still muttering her name. The officers called Jules, who arrived minute later, all apologies and shocked explanations. Cal was, as it turned out, her ex-fiancé. After a bad breakup, he disappeared from her life. No one realized he'd been living rent-free in the tiny utility closet near the kitchen for days, beer cans, snack wrappers, and all, ghosting through the nights. They found his backpack stuffed with her old t-shirts and a kitchen knife taped to his belt. I shuddered, realizing just how close I'd come to walking straight into tragedy. Sometimes you hear stories, but you never believe they'll happen to you. That night, every cliché felt true, the irrational comfort of checking the lock, the hopelessness when you realize it's not the door you have to fear. It's what's already inside. As they loaded Cal into the back of the police car, I realized how thin the line between a close call and something much darker truly is. For days after I left that house, sleep hung just out of my reach. 2 years later, even now, I still check every inside closet before I unpack, finger double-bolting doors in strange places, running through what-ifs that spiral into the early morning. Sometimes, survival looks like common sense. Sometimes, it's just luck spurred by an anxious cigarette at midnight. I'd like to say that after the police took Cal away, after Jules's panicked apologies and promises, life went back to normal. But I had one day left in the Adirondacks, and every unfamiliar noise in that home was suddenly a warning, not a comfort. I barely managed to pack before dawn and backed out of that gravel driveway with my heart in my throat. My friends later told me I was overreacting. Maybe I was. But when you wake up with a stranger's fist punching through your bedroom door, you see the world through a new lens, every silence thickens, every curtain could be hiding someone watching. Soon after, work called me south for an interview in Pennsylvania, another temporary gig. Even then, as I scrolled through hundreds of listings late one night, my mind flickered through every detail, window placement, locks, how recent the owner's reviews were. Still, hotel costs were brutal, so I caved. Another Airbnb, this one reviewed by dozens of exhausted travelers. Safe neighborhood, they all said. Great host. Would stay again. The host, Lindsay, wrote back immediately. You can check in early if you want, I'll text you the code. In her photo, she wore a yellow scarf and the kind of grin that puts you at ease. She sent detailed instructions for the keypad lock, just press the star button, then enter the 4 digits, easy. The place itself was clean, small, and tucked onto a quiet suburban street. I told myself this would be routine. Lock the doors, check the windows. Interview at 3, then drive home. Truth is, I was relieved for simple comforts. I showered early, prepped clothes, and set my schedule. My only plan was to watch some movies in the living room, big leather sectional, a faux fireplace, surround sound that made even old sitcoms feel new. That first night, I thought my greatest challenge would be shaking my anxiety and resisting the urge to sleep on the couch. I put on an old Marvel film, wrapped myself in a throw, and tried to let the stress of travel roll off my shoulders. I must have drifted off sometime after midnight, the lines between dream and movie and real life beginning to blur. That's when the doorbell rang. The sound startled me straight awake, confusion twisting through my half-sleep. Was it real? Was it just the TV? The bell rang again, sharper this time, constant enough to stir a familiar, buzzing fear. I checked the time, 11:31 p.m. Heart hammering, I crept to the window, not daring to open the front door. I peered through a frosted pane and saw him, a thin, middle-aged man, head bowed low, a battered brown bag in his grip. His other hand hovered just above the screen door handle, knuckles white. I froze, instinct telling me to wait, to stay silent. But the bell rang a third, then a fourth time, long and insistent. With a burst of misplaced bravado, I shouted through the door, "Move on. You've got the wrong house." He barely reacted, just stood there, bag still in hand, neck twisted at an uncomfortable angle, a shadowy figure bathed in the yellow porch light. I slammed the bolt tight, grabbed my phone, and called Lindsay. No answer. Every noise in the house seemed to echo double. After a minute, he stepped away, disappearing into the dark. I watched from between my fingers, convinced I saw the headlights of a red sedan flicker to life at the curb, one blinker strobing while the other lay dark and broken. I waited for him to drive away, willing myself to breathe. My hunger dragged me into the kitchen, because sometimes, routine wins over fear. Still, as I headed back to the living room, something caught my eye from the window, headlights, high beams on, glaring back at the house. He hadn't left. He was parked in the drive, watching. I crept upstairs, looking out from the safety of the bedroom's higher view. The car never moved, the lights never blinked out. I tried to convince myself this was nothing, that the interview in the morning would clear my mind, that not every odd occurrence was a ticking time bomb. But the sight of that failed blinker, glowing in the midnight dark, kept burning in my mind. I didn't call the police. I didn't want to be the guest who overreacts. Instead, I climbed into bed, shoes still half on, hoping daylight would come quickly. Sleep, that night, was a fragile, fractured thing, broken in pieces by every little sound inside the walls and every imagined footstep on the driveway outside. I spent most of those hours not really asleep, not fully awake either, playing the previous encounter over and over in my mind, tallying details. Did I lock both locks? Had I shut the kitchen window, the one behind the blinds? Each time I almost surrendered to fatigue, I'd snap back up, thinking of the thin man at the door and the battered brown bag. When the first pale streak of dawn slipped through the curtains, I took it as my cue to escape the limbo of anxiety and indecision. I gathered my things in near silence, shoved a granola bar into my bag, and made my way through the house, pausing at the front door. That's when I saw it, slightly ajar, chain lock undone, a faint chill leaking in from the cracks. I stood there, staring, asking myself if I had truly closed it behind me after I last checked, or if agitation had blurred my memory. The possibility that someone else had come in, or at least tried, loomed heavy over my mind. Outside, the driveway looked ordinary enough, the grass glistening with dew, and the world returned to the humdrum of small-town morning. But parked farther down, just where the mist began to rise from the street, sat a dark red car with its hazard lights winking. It was unmistakable, the same battered sedan with the single broken headlight. My pulse raced as I hurried my bag to the trunk and slipped into the driver's seat, locking the doors with a trembling thumb. As I glanced back at the empty front walk, a shiver crawled down my back that would linger for days. I drove away faster than I should have, not brave enough to test the car's patience or intentions. Every turn along the route to my interview felt haunted, each red light a potential stop for a car that might be following. By the time I reached my destination, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, but the adrenaline pumping through my system kept me sharp-eyed and wary. Later, when Lindsay finally responded to my midnight voicemails, her message was friendly but tinged with apology. She asked if everything had gone well, and I told her about the man, the doorbell, the red car I'd seen on the drive. There was a pause in her reply, those familiar little blinking dots, silent and suspenseful. And then, nothing. She never answered, not about the car, the man, or the incident at all. When I checked the Airbnb listing a few weeks later, out of a lingering curiosity, or maybe a need for closure, the place was gone. Disappeared, as if it had never existed. In ordinary life, such things can be shrugged off or excused as coincidences, as the lingering weirdness of new places. But for a traveler, your measure of safety is always shifting, always uncertain. The memory of that front door, wide open to the empty dawn, never really faded. People I shared the story with debated what had happened. Some thought it was just bad timing, a delivery gone wrong, a hungry stranger hoping for charity. Others swore it felt like something more, something calculated. There's a discomfort in not knowing if a threat is real or imagined, if all those moving parts almost spun into something tragic, or if anxiety just colored the moment darker than it deserved. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself it was nothing, the impression of the visitor and his red car continued to haunt me, woven into my consciousness like a warning whispered just on the edge of sleep. I didn't call the police a second time. I didn't want to explain, again, the creeping dread that came with every midnight knock. Instead, I moved on, one more story tucked under the skin for the next time I booked a room somewhere new. Life, as it tends to do, returned me to a routine eventually. Work, chores, phone calls, mundane details that helped bury the experience, at least on the surface. And yet, when I'd lie awake at night in yet another guest room, miles from home, listening to the hushed rustling of unfamiliar walls, I'd remember the man's gaze, the unblinking high beams, and the silence waiting beyond the porch. I told myself, again and again, that I was fine. But the mind knows better than that. It hoards every close call, every second chance. Still, even knowing all that, I kept traveling. Maybe stubborn, maybe hopeful. You never really know what's behind a stranger's door, or what you might bring with you from the last place, no matter how hard you try to leave it all behind. It's strange how the mind keeps track of all the oddities you collect on the road, each experience added to a private ledger, sometimes dramatic, sometimes just a shadow passing by a window, all feeding into a sort of restless vigilance. I tried to quiet those collected ghosts, to chalk bad luck up to chance. Even with a brave face for friends or family, I started favoring chain hotels, basic and bland, those places everyone ignores because they're so unremarkable. Familiarity, suddenly, became safety. But just as I'd rebuilt my nerves, another trip forced a step beyond my comfort zone. My wife, Shannon, longed for a beachside break. The kids, Sam and Corinne, had both finished a tough school year, and ordinary days felt like they were closing in. Shannon found a modest Airbnb near the Carolina shore, nothing fancy, 5 minutes from the sea, tucked behind a sandy lane shaded with live oaks. The reviews gave it high marks for privacy, a gentle stream out back, patios for evening card games, and a promise of, just like home, but better. We arrived on a late summer afternoon, sand already clinging to our shins, skin tight with salt and sun. There was a lovely rhythm to the next few hours. Sam, 8 and fearless, raced Corinne to claim spaces in the cottage, arguing over bunk beds and window seats. Shannon filled the fridge with groceries, and I fired up the grill, feeling tension bleed away with the flicker of flame. That evening, after sunset walks and stories traded in the glimmering dark, both kids collapsed into sleep while Shannon and I sat on the porch, lazy with vacation. If I had to choose one moment to bottle up forever, it would have been that first night, the wind from the ocean, the laughter from the kitchen, fullness and peace so real they seemed to anchor the house in gentle light. But nothing ever stays perfect, does it? At breakfast the next morning, Corinne barely picked at her pancakes. Her eyes were shadowed in a way I'd never seen, silent and stiff, bracing for questions. We tried gentle prodding, maybe she missed her friends, maybe she was just tired from the drive and sun. Finally, with a voice rough and hesitant, she whispered, "I saw shadows in the backyard last night." It's a phrase that would have been easy to dismiss. Children, after all, have their own logic, fear painted by imagination. But Corinne's story gained the weight of detail as she spoke. She described shapes gliding from the tree line to the very edge of the yard, then pausing, lingering, as if waiting for someone to notice. She said one shadow stopped and waved at her, and as Sam listened, even he fell silent. He tried a laugh, tried to tease, but Corinne's distress drained all the light from his voice. Shannon and I tried to settle her nerves. We explained, with every ounce of comforting adult logic, that shadows can play tricks, that moonlight and leaves and tired eyes create ghosts from nothing. Corinne nodded, mollified but not convinced. She spent the day between us on the sand, refusing to wander far, asking to sit close by the fire as the sun dipped low. That second night we were watchful, careful to double-check locks, wary of every creak and sigh of the house. At 10, everyone headed to bed, though sleep came slowly and unease had crept in, joined us, chilling the air. Just past midnight, Sam shuffled to our bedroom door, face pale, words tripping on fear. "They're back," he whispered. "The ones outside." He refused to look out the window, shaking so hard the bedsheet trembled with him. I scanned the darkness beyond the pane, saw nothing but the floodlights spill on grass. Still, I could feel something had shifted, and I spent the next hour holding him close, murmuring reassurances I could barely believe myself. That night, sleep finally found us, but only after exhaustion conquered fear. We all woke with the sun, acting normal, shaking off the past like a bad dream, though none of us truly forgot. That new day was supposed to bring a reset, a chance to let salty air and sunlight burn off whatever unease clung to us from the night before. I tried my best to offer normalcy, bacon frying, orange juice poured, a morning radio playlist running quietly in the background. Corinne's appetite was faint, Sam's laughter oddly subdued. I could feel Shannon's glance finding mine every so often. Beneath her calm, the worry had burrowed in, too. But the world outside was brimming with color, the ocean just a short walk away, and for a few fleeting hours we all managed to play along. The solution that morning, it seemed, was to stay close, no meandering down side streets or exploring the woods behind the house, just time together. We spent the afternoon laughing in the surf, building sand castles that fended off the whisper of the previous night's fears. Looking back, it's wild how quickly the promise of ordinary joys can crowd out shadows, for a while, anyway. Returning to the rental that afternoon, an invisible tension returned. As I checked the back door, something small and strange caught my attention. The door was unlocked, not wide open, but the deadbolt sat unlatched when I remembered, quite clearly, turning it. I asked Shannon if she'd gone in last, or maybe left it open in her rush to gather towels. She shook her head, puzzled but unconcerned, brushing it off as the cost of too many hands and kids running in and out. Still, I walked through the whole place, checking each window, each sliding door, a quiet inventory against the unreal. We slipped back into our evening rituals. Cards, big bowls of pasta, stories about school and summer camp. Corinne started to come back to herself, growing livelier as dusk deepened. The world felt almost normal, if a bit fragile, until bedtime pressed in again like a returning tide. The kids went off, Corinne slinking quietly into her room, Sam trailing after, both shadows softer than before. Shannon and I lingered at the table, wine glasses half full, speaking in low voices about anything but the obvious. Then, just as midnight brushed the clocks, a knock came at our bedroom door. Sam, white as a sheet, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and fresh fear, could barely get the words out. "Someone's at the window," he said, voice trembling. "And they said if I scream, they'll hurt us all." I can remember the blood leaving my face in a cold cascade, the slow, awful realization that this was something beyond childhood fantasy. I slid from bed, heart pounding, and gathered Sam to my chest as Shannon flicked on the light. He described it all in a rush, a shape at his window, a finger pressed to glass, a voice low and taunting. He was too scared to look any longer and ran straight to us. Now Corinne appeared, wide-eyed and terrified, confirming that there'd been a shadow, someone almost waving her closer through her half-open curtains. Two parents' minds working overtime, calculate, evaluate, act. I peered through blinds, knuckles white, but the backyard was empty, only the grass waving in the floodlight. We huddled there, for in a room, panic circling the edges. "It's just someone trying to scare us," I told them, but the words felt brittle and unconvincing. Nobody wanted to sleep alone, so we made a fort out of blankets in the living room, a campout to stave off dread. We built pillows into walls, set up sleeping bags, and told ourselves silly jokes, waiting for morning to save us from our imaginations. But as the house finally quieted, long shadows pooled by the sliding glass door, I caught movement beyond the glass, 3 figures in black, faces hidden behind masks, staring in. For a few frozen seconds, I truly didn't know if I was awake or lost in a dream. I jolted up, fierce with adrenaline, waking Shannon and the kids. She gasped as she caught sight of them. They didn't flee or speak, just stood there, eerie in their silent vigil. A hand jiggled the door handle, locked, thank heaven. Corinne pressed herself into the pile of blankets, Sam cried out, and Shannon dialed 911 with furious speed. Seconds drew long and thin as I grabbed the only weapon I could find, a poker from the fireplace, and planted myself between my family and the threat outside. They pressed closer to the glass, waving what looked like a blade, mocking us through the layers of glass and night. I did the only thing I could, I shouted, voice raw and panicked, demanding they leave us alone. For a moment, laughter, sharp and bright, twisted into a parody of joy, cut the quiet. That's when the lights of a police car exploded through the dark, sirens blaring, blue and red surging through every window. The next moments blurred together, adrenaline mixing with confusion as the world outside shifted from surreal nightmare to frantic reality. Police voices shouted commands, radios crackling urgent. I couldn't see what was happening beyond the glare, but I could hear the chaos, heavy footfalls pounding the deck, the unmistakable thud of bodies grappling just out of sight. Two of the figures bolted into the woods, black-clad shapes flickering beneath the floodlights. The third dropped to his knees, hands up, caught in a storm of law and consequence. Within moments, the officers had breached the patio, barking over their shoulders for everyone to stay inside. We huddled together, hearts racing. Through the rattle of glass and the harsh arc of flashlight beams, I could make out the remnants of the masked intruders, a pair of masks lying crumpled on the wet grass, one of them dented, almost comic in their innocent design. The laughter from earlier was gone, replaced by desperate shouts as police closed in. Shannon squeezed my hand so tightly her nails left marks in my palm. I tried to keep my voice steady for the kids, who clung to us like driftwood in a storm. "It's going to be all right. The police are here now," I whispered, though the truth was I was just as scared by how close it all came to disaster, how little had stood between us and some grim news headline. The next half hour was spent under fluorescent kitchen lights, answering the same questions again and again for the responding officers, ages of the kids, who saw what, when did we notice the men, had there been threats before, where exactly had the voices come from? I glanced out the windows in the breaks between questions, half afraid that the other two would emerge from the darkness to finish what they'd started. Eventually we learned more, enough to feed both our shock and relief. The arrested masked man, barely older than Corinne herself, stared at his shoes and handcuffs, mumbling that it was just a prank, that they didn't mean no harm. But the officers' faces told a different story. When the search turned up blades, one rusty, one sharp, new edge of gravity came over the house. The cops explained there'd been a rash of similar break-ins up and down the coast, teenagers daring each other, escalating risk for social media points, or maybe a twisted sense of power. Our family, it seemed, had just become a target for their game. The full weight hit us as the night crawled by. What if the door hadn't been locked? What if, in our weariness, we'd believed all those small noises were just wind instead of warning? Corinne and Sam listened as the officers took our statements, wide-eyed and trembling, innocence chipped away as they learned the world was far less safe than any child should expect. The police gathered evidence, snapped photos, bagged the masks and the knives, and when the sun finally cracked the horizon, blue uniforms faded into daylight and the world started to right itself. We were left with a fractured version of the vacation we'd wanted, bags packed too soon, beach clothes abandoned in the dryer, our little raft of peace splintered by what might have been. Before we left, Shannon squeezed the officer's hands with a gratitude I felt in my bones. The deputies offered sad, tired smiles, giving us a card and a case number, and telling us to call if anything, even a feeling, struck us wrong in the days ahead. We drove away in silence, too drained for words, the kids drifting into a fitful doze as I watched the trees thin to sand, then ocean, then highway. I wondered how long it would take before we felt safe again, how many nights would pass before Corinne and Sam could sleep without checking behind every curtain. I'd like to say that the lessons we learned on that trip made us stronger, or wiser, or better travelers. But mostly, they made us wary, slow to trust, careful with doors, and honest with our fear. There are scars from nights like those, not just on the body, but on the heart, too. Sometimes, it's not the physical danger but the knowledge that danger came so close that haunts you. We never went back to that rental, or to that stretch of coast. The listing disappeared within weeks. But for every road trip, every small-town detour after, Shannon reminded me, before settling in, check the windows, check the locks, and never, ever brush off a child's fears as nothing but dreams. Even as the years have quietly pulled that terrifying night further back in memory, its sharp edges never really dulled. Sometimes I still wake to the scrape of a branch on glass, or the hush of unfamiliar footsteps echoing in my mind, only to remember it's just the shell of an old fear. Kids grow resilient, or at least learn to carry their own shields. For a while, Corinne and Sam watched movies snuggled tight between us, and Shannon double-checked every bolt with a kind of quiet urgency that only parents of the newly shaken know. I kept traveling, the habit ingrained, the wanderlust undiminished, but every plan came with a private checklist. Do the neighbors look watchful? How fast could I get from this Airbnb's upstairs bedroom to my car if things went wrong? Was the owner's story about recent repairs really just a small thing, or did it hide something else? For every smooth, forgettable night came another odd little flash, the flicker of strange headlights pausing outside a mountain cabin, the echo of heavy footsteps on a porch in a snowstorm, a faint smell of cigars on a pillow in a room that should have been empty for weeks. I started paying attention not just to the stories in the reviews online, but to the stories never told, the ones that lived in the silences, in the 3-star ratings with no comments, the rentals that vanished quicker than host explanations could catch up. Even friends who claimed nothing ever surprised them started sharing their own tales of visits marred by slamming doors, unexplained voices, deliveries that no one admitted to calling for. But always, in the back of my mind, there was that first night in the Adirondacks, the reality, the randomness, how something almost unspeakable can slip in through a crack when your guard is down, and how quick you have to become at listening to the voice inside you that says, "Lock the door again." Trust your nerves, even if someone else would tell you you're being silly. The reality of travel is this: for all the escapism, the perfect sunsets on porches, the lingering relaxation of wine and card games, there's risk. There's vulnerability. And yet, most of us keep reaching for adventure, maybe because the possibility of the extraordinary so often outweighs the anxiety of the unknown. That doesn't mean the rules have to change only after something goes wrong. Now, when friends call for advice about booking a stranger's house, I give them a checklist, not out of fear, but out of love, a kind of shield built from experience. First, ask the host about neighbors. Who lives nearby? What's the emergency contact if something feels wrong at midnight? Second, check entry points before you bring in your bags. Windows, doors, even the attic hatch, that's not paranoia, it's insurance. Review the lock setup, not just the code, but the system itself. Snap a photo of the front of the house in case you need to relay details to the police. And always, always trust your first gut warning. If something feels off, don't try to rationalize it away. It's taken me a long time to forgive myself for the moments I tried to wish the bad things away, for telling Sam and Corinne, it's just a dream, there's nothing out there. Now, my parenting leans toward radical honesty, balanced with comfort. Sometimes people come to the wrong place. Sometimes we get scared for a good reason. But we always take care of each other, and we always ask for help. Those new rituals, born in fear, have turned into the backbone of how I travel, how I live, and how I reassure my family. Of course, the next generation already adapts in ways I never could have guessed. On our recent trip through Tennessee, Sam, now a teenager, schooled me in smart home sensors and two-way cameras. It's easy, Dad, you just link it to your phone. Corinne, now 12, rolls her eyes at scary movies. We lived worse, she says, with a grin that both warms and breaks my heart. We still tell stories, trading tales from miles down the road, some of them made braver by distance, some softened by laughter. But beneath the punchlines is a promise we made in the blue light of that Carolina morning: check the locks, keep the phone charged, and stay together. The roads I travel now are shaped by what happened then, not so much by fear anymore as by awareness, a deeper vigilance. The faces at my table have grown older, Sam's voice is almost as deep as mine, Corinne wears her hair in new braids and plays music I don't recognize. Shannon's laugh is softer and more frequent, but behind it sits a watchfulness that was never there in our early years together. Each family trip, each weekend away, some ritual unfolds without thinking. First, we each circle the new place, peering behind closet doors and tugging on window frames, poking fun at the thoroughness but never forgetting why. It's a rhythm, almost a dance now. Unpack, sweep the rooms, test the lock 3 times. I've come to think of it not as paranoia but as the price of experience, like checking the depth of water before you dive. And if it slows us a little if we say no to the occasional, too good to be true, offer or leave a property early because something raises our hackles, so be it. We decide together what feels right, sometimes erring on the side of caution. Better an awkward story than a disastrous one. It hasn't made us less adventurous. In some ways, it's made our adventures richer. Now, when we stand at a trailhead or watch the sunrise from a deck perched high above a valley, there's a deeper appreciation, a quiet shared gratitude. The laughter rings truer for having been shaky, the moments of peace brighter among the memories of chaos. When the wind off Lake Superior rattled the window of a Michigan cottage last fall, Corinne giggled, threw her pillow at her brother, and declared she'd keep watch for phantoms. Even as she spoke, I saw the way her gaze flickered to the shadowed corners, the way Shannon's hand found mine. We talk openly about it now, not shoving fear into a dark mental attic but letting it into the conversation when it comes up. New friends admit to hidden anxieties, older relatives trade tales of restless nights in unfamiliar beds. All these stories layer over each other, one big, timeless campfire where everyone's seen something in the dark, heard a noise they can't explain. We listen, nod, share what we've done differently since, and sometimes help someone else sidestep a bad night. I've been asked, more than once, if I regret any of it, if I wish we'd just stayed home that weekend in the Adirondacks, or taken the safer hotel in Pennsylvania, or booked a luxury spot instead of a beach cottage. It's not easy to answer. There's a part of me that will always think in contingencies, always run escape plans when a key doesn't work, or rehearse worst-case scenarios lying in an unfamiliar bed. But what I don't regret is what it's taught me about my own resilience, my family's courage, how each close call pulled us tighter together. We're wary, yes, but not cowed. In the space carved out by fear, love found a foothold. Some stories, I realize, only get told in fragments. Sometimes it's months before Shannon speaks about how she refused to sleep that second night by the shore, only drifting off at dawn with her hand tucked under my pillow. Sometimes it's Sam standing guard by a window, 2 years later in a Colorado rental, flashlight beam slicing harmlessly through the empty yard. More often, it's just small, familiar actions, the way we linger around a fireline, backs to each other, eyes on the shadows, not out of dread, but as a quiet act of care. If you listen long enough, everyone you meet on the road has a story about the moment a good trip nearly went bad. Some are funny, some are wild, all are quietly laced with the reminder that for all our planning, we're always guests in someone else's story, too. The world is full of wonderful places, worthy of awe. But we don't respect them any less for knowing that, sometimes, what's remarkable isn't just the beauty of a mountain dawn, but that we get to wake up and see it, together. As the years have melted one into the next, I've gathered more passport stamps and rental receipts than I ever anticipated. Sometimes I think the sum total of our strange experiences isn't caution, but empathy, new understanding that everyone you meet carries their own legacy of unease, stories of barely averted trouble tucked behind practiced smiles. Sometimes this realization softens you, sometimes it shapes your instincts, giving you another reason to keep your eyes open, to offer kindness in places where it matters most. On a windswept evening in Maine, sipping coffee on the wide porch of an old saltbox cottage, I found myself sharing our history with new friends, fellow travelers who'd arrived with children and dogs, eager to trade stories instead of just pleasantries. There was Sophie, a school librarian from Montreal with a daughter the same age as Corinne, who confessed she never booked ground floor rentals anywhere, because of a break-in years ago. Jack and Lila, a retired couple from Ohio, laughed about their own failed adventure guarding a cabin from raccoons that weren't what they seemed, until the paw prints at the window outlined much larger hands than any animal could make. The laughter between us was real, full-bodied, seasoned with nervous energy. We sat, watched the fog roll in off the ocean, and swapped advice with a seriousness that bordered on sacred ritual. Lila offered her system for hidden emergency cash. Sophie described a spreadsheet of Airbnb hosts flagged for not installing external cameras. I shared our story, haltingly at first, then in a torrent, the Adirondack house, the midnight intruder, the ringing bell in Pennsylvania, the masked strangers by the sliding door. With each detail, I felt the knot in my chest loosen just a touch. Every story echoed in someone else's voice, each lesson lodged deeper by recognition. Out there, under the dim porch light, we all agreed, trust your instincts even when logic pushes back. Sophie's daughter, Naomi, stared up at her mother and then at me. "Are you still scared?" she asked, voice small but steady. For a long moment, I debated my answer. Then I told her, truthfully, that sometimes I was, but not in the same way. I explained that being careful didn't mean stopping adventures, it just meant preparing yourself, looking out for each other, and never assuming danger looked like a monster. The conversation drifted deeper as the sky darkened and stars forced their way through the mist. Jack confided that after their own close call, he began leaving a note on the inside of their door each time they traveled. "We are together. We are safe. If someone is reading this, please protect what you find." It was a small superstition, perhaps, but one that made each new place feel a little more like home for however long they stayed. That night, as I lay awake in a new bed, the old fears returned, familiar but not quite as sharp as before. I could hear Corinne laughing softly in the next room, scrolling through a movie with Naomi, the sound gentle and ordinary. In the stillness, Shannon's hand found mine, fingers threading together with the quiet message we'd been exchanging for years: not alone. Not this time. Sometimes, I think the best stories are found not just in the risks survived, but in the strength you grow from surviving them. The world is neither just safe nor just dangerous, it's a place layered with possibility and risk side by side, the two in constant conversation. What I know for sure, after every close call, every night staring at locks and listening for footsteps, is that together, we're always stronger. And that's the truth I pack, every time, just before I close the door. Somewhere along the journey, fear becomes less an enemy and more a traveling companion. You learn to negotiate with it, to let it sharpen your focus without letting it rob you of the good things: sunrise on a glassy lake, the laughter of your children echoing through woods, the sweetness of a meal shared on a porch with new friends. Sometimes, you realize the most important vigilance isn't just against strangers or shadows outside, but against the temptations to withdraw, to close the world off and lock yourself away from joy. Despite all the brushes with danger, the truth is that the beauty of travel, of letting yourself belong to a place, even briefly, is too powerful to give up. We keep booking the cottages and cabins, keep venturing down unfamiliar roads, but now our rituals are so practiced they hardly feel like chores. Before bedtime, we walk the boundaries, check every window and lock, and then, with the house snugged up tight as a ship on calm seas, we lay down the burdens of worry for the night. Shannon and I exchange a look not of fear, but respect for what we've learned and for what it's cost. What's changed most, though, is the way we talk about it all. The kids are old enough to understand that every adventure comes with risk, and instead of pretending the world is safer than it is, we invite them to participate in our rituals of caution. Sam takes the lead now, flicking on porch lights before stepping outside. Corinne reminds us to make sure back doors click shut. Shannon texts our itinerary to her sister back home. Our preparedness doesn't dampen our fun, it flavors it, adds a sense of accomplishment, of being in control where we can. Somewhere in a folder on my phone, I keep a checklist that's grown over the years. Each item holds a story behind it: confirm locks work before unpacking, that's the Adirondacks. Look for names on mailbox and signs of recent mail pickup, thank you, Pennsylvania. Introduce yourself to a neighbor if you see them, the beach at Carolina ensured that. Don't hesitate to call the hosts, persistently, if something feels off. Learn from that shadowed night staring at the lights of a red sedan. But not every lesson was forged in fear. Many are built from kindness: the neighbor who offered us barbecue and a place by their backyard fire, the host who left a handwritten note: welcome. You're safe here, complete with her cell number scrawled twice. We learn to adopt these gestures, too. I write notes now and leave them for the next guest, not because I'm still afraid, but because I want someone else to feel the comfort we've built for ourselves. Even the fear itself has faded, most days, into something far more manageable. A part of us, a voice that says, you made it through once, you know what to do if you ever have to again. Anxiety becomes part of the packing list, but not the heaviest thing in the bag. Shannon sometimes jokes, we travel with more plans for escape than we do for sightseeing. She's not wrong, but we also travel with more laughter, more open eyes, and softer hearts. It's easy to underestimate how many others have lived through their own close calls. Every coffee shop, every rental house, every picnic table on a scenic overlook holds stories we'll never hear, tales of sudden panic giving way to relief, of love grown deeper in the aftermath. I overhear warnings swapped in checkout lines, practical advice passed between strangers, don't ignore a knock at midnight. Always set an alarm. Trust your dog's bark. I smile because I know I'm not alone in the little bit of healthy caution I carry. Our family travels now with an odd confidence, not because we're fearless, but because we're practiced in facing what used to shake us. The kids still argue about who gets the window seat, Shannon still bickers with navigation apps, and I still hang our keys from the easiest hook to spot in case of a quick exit. Life moves forward, as it's meant to. I sometimes wonder when the old memories will finally seem like nothing but distant, improbable stories. Maybe they never will. But I'm glad for every lesson, glad for each safe return. I'm grateful we have each other come morning, no matter where we tuck in our heads. In the quiet time between destinations, I sometimes reflect on the way a single night, one decision, one unchecked window, one stranger lurking just beyond comfort, can ripple out across a lifetime of journeys. In the thick of it, you think the fear will swallow you whole, but later, it thins into something like wisdom. It's a bittersweet inheritance, one I try to pass to my children not as a burden, but as a tool. Caution doesn't have to be a closed door, it can be a light on the front porch, a way to see your way home in the dark. Those uneasy stories we once whispered after midnight have become both family legend and instruction. They remind us how quickly the extraordinary can elbow into the ordinary, how the people you love most are both your greatest vulnerability and your deepest strength. I remember, a few months after the Carolina ordeal, pulling off the highway halfway between Memphis and Little Rock, the van heavy with sleep and everyone looking for a stretch and a snack. Our Airbnb that night was a converted barn on a horse farm, a last-minute booking when hotels ran out in town. Corinne, by then old enough to hide her nerves behind a wry smile, was the first to step through the tall double doors. "Looks haunted," she announced, laughing. We walked the usual circuit, checked the windows and locks by moonlight, tested the doors twice. Sam insisted on putting his phone number next to the rental Wi-Fi code, just in case, he said, only half joking. We were light-hearted but thorough, a choreography of careful travelers who'd learned what they needed to feel safe. By the time the bags were stacked and the barn's lights dimmed, we lay awake just a few moments listening, not for intruders, not for ghosts, but for the welcome, familiar hush of a world settling around us. In the morning, we met the owners, Maggie and Russ, who had long careers behind them as police dispatchers. They shared coffee with us on the porch, spinning their own tales of late-night calls and strange stories left behind by guests. Eventually, their voices lowered and Russ admitted, "It's the ones who think nothing bad could ever happen that get surprised. If you're careful, you're halfway to peace already." That day stuck with me. It reframed our family's vigilance as a sign of respect, not paranoia, a way to honor both the beauty of discovery and the realness of risk. I found myself remembering Jules, the host back in upstate New York, and wondered if she ever stopped feeling a chill at midnight in her own home. Every stranger at another door, every new city silhouette through a car window, reminded me that the world is bigger than our fear, but that we owe it to each other to be ready all the same. That's the honest gift of survival stories, they reconnect us with gratitude for what went right, not just what almost went wrong. I started writing a travel journal again, first little notes, then whole pages, recording both the sunsets and the near misses, the friends met along the way and those nearly disastrous nights. Sometimes when anxiety threatened to creep back in, I'd leaf through those pages, reminding myself that vigilance and hope are never in opposition. Now, when friends ask for my best travel tip, I say, lean into the adventure, but respect your own instincts. Never apologize for doing what you need to feel safe, and teach your kids the same. It's not just locks and lights or lists and plans, it's the mindset that you belong in every story you step into, and you have the right to leave if it stops feeling true. We still travel. We still check and double-check. But more often than not, the worst thing we find these days isn't a lurking threat, but a burnt-out light bulb, or a sticky lock, or the comical thump of raccoons in the trash after midnight. The laughter afterward is richer because we know how quickly luck can turn and because, every night, we end up together. Of course, let's continue with the next section, adjusting for your final target word count as we approach the exact total needed. Travel will always be a bet, a leap of faith over the chasm between what you know and what you hope. What the years have revealed isn't some secret to staying safe forever, or a surefire system for keeping danger at bay. Instead, it's the realization that peace lives in preparation and in the gentle surrender to possibility, risk and reward held in delicate balance. That lesson only deepened with each trip after, as my family and I crossed state lines, borders, and oceans, folding new destinations into our memory. In small villages where porch lights flickered and distant church bells tolled, we found moments of such beauty they felt like promises. Once, in an old Quebecois inn, the landlady offered us candied ginger and advice about coyotes. In a cottage in Oregon, the mausoleum's silence was broken only by the surf pounding rocks below our window and by Sam, who, despite his braver years, still slept with a flashlight and a baseball bat within reach. Each new host seemed just as complex as we were, some cautious, some casual, all with their own stories to trade if we listened a little longer. For every shadowy night spent listening for footsteps, there were mornings bursting with light, revealing nothing but ordinary peace. I think of the Appalachian sunrise that painted my family in gold, the laughter that rose from Corinne when she found a trail of wild blackberries leading behind a cottage, the way Shannon's worry lifted on a riverbank in Montana, the children's hands muddy and their cheeks bright with freedom. Each good memory set anchor against the churn of darker ones. We understood, in time, that our close call hadn't stolen the magic of travel, but rather clarified it. The risk somehow illuminated the strength of safety built in community, in intention, in attention. The world didn't filter itself for our peace of mind, we learned we must do that with our own choices. We became slower to dismiss the unease of a restless night or a strange car idling too long outside the window, and quicker to reach out, ask a neighbor, or pack up and move on if our hearts wouldn't settle. That wisdom didn't stop us. It led us on. Even as new technology crept in, security apps, neighborhood alerts, online groups sharing tips for safe travel, the core of it remained unchanged from what Maggie and Russ had said: if you're careful, you're halfway to peace. Sam and Corinne, growing into their own kinds of independence, learned that their confidence was more than a match for what the world had to throw. There were nights when the only reminder of previous fear was the gentle click of a well-locked door and the sacred silence that followed, signaling all was well. Shannon's eyes still trace every window before sleep, and I still walk the perimeter of each house. But now, those rituals flow smoothly and without tension. They are simply part of our belonging to the world, a small price for collecting stories, for growing together, for trusting that in the dance of risk and beauty, we can tip the scales toward what's good. So yes, when people ask, was it worth it? Even after everything, would you go back, book that mountain house, risk the shadows for one more story? My answer is always the same: the world is chaotic and wild and beautiful. The cost of learning how to move through it safely is one I'm willing to pay. Because every morning after, when sunlight cuts through the curtains, and laughter stirs from beds or sleeping bags, I remember that neither caution nor courage win alone, they work together. In every place you lay your head, you're writing the next page. And my family? We're still adding to the story. Absolutely. Here is the concluding section, adjusted to reach your exact total word count of 10,858. If there's one thing these years of traveling, learning, and living with both shadows and sunlight have given us, it's a lasting faith in our ability to adapt. I watch Sam and Corinne now, so much older than the little kids who once shrank from strange noises in moonlit bedrooms. They've learned the same thing I have, that readiness and openness aren't opposites, but partners. We still get startled now and then, still feel our hearts quicken if headlights sweep too slowly across a window or if a voice calls out unexpectedly in the night. But we also laugh harder, because the very same world that can frighten you can also fill your life with joy. I'm smarter, maybe, than I was that night staring into the wild, uncertain eyes of a stranger in the Adirondacks. There's still a jolt of anxiety, sometimes, when I check into a new place and sense something just a touch off, an older, deeper hush in the air, or a door that seems to close itself a little too easily. But I don't fear those moments anymore. They've taught me to rely on the things that really protect us: love, alertness, connection, and a willingness to act fast when something doesn't feel right. And the world, for all its unpredictability, is still open to all of us willing to meet it honestly. Now, when I help a friend choose a vacation rental, or when someone young asks about what to look for when opening a new door, my advice is honest. I tell them, listen, truly listen, to what your instincts are telling you. Don't suppress that tiny alarm bell or brush off your discomfort just to avoid seeming overly cautious. Take the extra second. Close the window tight. Ask your host that second question. If something feels wrong, ask for help, or leave. The peace you're paying for should never depend on ignoring your gut. But I also tell them to look for the good, not just avoid the bad. Some of the most sacred memories we own are born from trust and openness: a neighbor who brings over bread and coffee because they heard your laughter through the wall, a local who points you to a lake unlisted on any map, the strangers who watch your kids for 5 minutes while you fumble for your keys in the rain. The very act of travel is built on a kind of hope, that the world, though risky, is here to be experienced and shared. When the sun rises on the first morning of a new stay, I walk outside with my coffee and stand on whatever porch or deck or little balcony the place has to offer. The night before, I might have checked the locks 3 times or listened carefully for footsteps. But in the new light, everything seems possible again. If worry lingers, so does gratitude. I close my eyes and take a deep breath, listening to birds, to laughter from the kitchen, to the simple presence of my family nearby. I don't believe our story is unique, and in that, there's comfort. All over the world, countless travelers hold their own archive of oddities and near misses. Their lessons echo our own, weaving together a quiet fellowship of survivors and dreamers who refuse to give up the thrill of wandering just because a few nights went sideways. What matters, in the end, is that we're still here, still curious, still optimistic, still plotting new adventures. Shadows may come and go, threats may rise and pass, but our faith in each other, in every morning that follows, remains unbroken. So yes, the next trip, the next strange window, the next sunrise, will also belong to us. Nothing, not even fear, can keep us from what we love best: waking together in a new place, unafraid to start again.